Ninja fans, it's Kaylee Water Ninja here with another My Little Pony video. After doing a few other backstory videos, I decided to do another, and this time on the popular villain King Sombra. It is so interesting to find out the hidden secrets of these lesser known characters, and to finally share the truth. Now, just like my Chrysalis backstory, I used the IDW comics, as they are the only depiction of Sombra's past, and it was the only information I could go off of. Additionally, the comics featured his eventual redemption, which doesn't exactly line up with the show, but is a heartwarming and battle-oriented story to tell. If you guys enjoyed this video, I could do one about his return, which is a continuation of his backstory in the comics. Well, without further interruption, let's reveal his story. Sombra's story is told through the diary he wrote throughout his time in the Crystal Empire, and it shows his slow progression to evil. It all started in the middle of a cold winter's night. It was blisteringly cold, and a blizzard was roaring as the Crystal Guards came across a young foal covered in snow. He was gray and absent of color, unlike the crystal-sheened coats, but was a pony to them nonetheless. They brought him to safety in the Empire and placed him in Chestnut Falls Orphanage. They decided his name would be Sombra because it was the only word he spoke when he was discovered. This was because that was the only word little Sombra had remembered. Shortly after arriving at the orphanage, he began attending classes with the other foals, but as he had never been to school before, was far behind. He had difficulty saying their words as the only one he knew was Sombra, and required extra tutoring from Miss Chestnut. Fortunately, he was a quick learner and caught up with his classmates in no time, but even as his grades were rising, his friends were dwindling at zero. No one wanted to hang out with a non-crystal pony who spoke differently and still didn't have a cutie mark. One day, another odd pony out introduced herself and proposed a friendship between them. Her name was Radiant Hope, and she was just the light Sombra had needed. She didn't have any friends either because she talked about seeing strange things, which she called her fairy friends. It is later revealed that she had a skill to see things others couldn't. Sombra also thought this peculiar, but accepted her all the same, as she did for him. The other ponies continued to judge them, but the two hardly noticed among all of their made-up games and fun times together. They even collected gems throughout the year to save up for the Crystal Fair. It was Radiant Hope's favorite event, and she wanted to share all of it with Sombra. She explained how the fair was meant to restore the unity and spirit of the Empire and to protect it from outside forces. She continues by telling him about the crystal heart glowing as all of the ponies and their princess gather around it. Their princess at the time was Amore, and there isn't much known about her except that she's not an alicorn but a unicorn. With pure excitement, Sombra wished to see the heart, which Radiant Hope happily replied that they can right then. It is always open to the public and is a centralized spectacle of the kingdom. Once they arrived, they came close to the heart and gazed into it. It was known that the heart would sometimes reveal your future, and this is exactly what occurred with them. Radiant Hope saw herself as a princess, but Sombra saw himself as the Dark Lord he eventually became. With pure dread and fear, Sombra's eyes widened in horror. After this, Princess Amore joined the pair and told them that this magical artifact reflects what's in your heart, but emphasized how that vision isn't set in stone. She believed you always have the power to pave your own future. After this, she inquired about what they saw, which Sombra only replied with seeing a shadow. He resented lying to her, but was too ashamed of what he had saw. With worry in her eyes, Amore reminded him once more that he could change whatever he had seen. Unfortunately, Sombra did not take this to heart. Finally, the day of the Crystal Fair had arrived. Radiant Hope was filled with glee, and she burst into Sombra's room. She continued to exclaim with excitement of all the things she didn't want to miss out on. But then Sombra was surrounded with terror as his legs became immobile. He was rushed to the medical center and continued to deteriorate in health. Radiant Hope decided to stay with him throughout the whole day and miss the beloved Crystal Fair. As quickly as it came, once the day had ended, Sombra was completely restored. Radiant Hope then began dreaming for the next fair, but just as had happened that year, Sombra became ill the next fair and the next. Every year the same thing happened, and as his pain grew, so did his longing to see the Crystal Fair. Radiant Hope stayed by his side year after year and never got to experience it with him herself, which filled them both with sorrow. But one year, when they were fully grown, the pain became too much. Sombra was lifted into the air, and a shadow began to encompass and rip him apart. With pure fear, he shouted for Radiant Hope to help him. In desperation, she cast a spell which miraculously saved his life, and even earned her cutie mark. It was a golden medical symbol, and the two of them celebrated for her victory that took so long to arrive. After this, Radiant Hope began to exploit and utilize her ability in the medical field, and discovered her healing magic was extremely powerful. Powerful enough to get her a spot at Celestia's school for gifted young unicorns. Once the letter arrived, she cheerfully approached Sombra, but all he did was scowl. This letter was just confirmation that her destiny to become a princess was in motion, and that his destiny to grow dark and dismal was underway. He saw no hope of changing his fate. In realization and grief, Sombra ran from the scene and left Radiant Hope to wonder what she had done wrong. She hadn't even told him what the letter was, but he already knew. He ran and couldn't stop himself as he left the Crystal Empire and had arrived back in the snowy world he had first been found in. But on his arrival, he came across a cluster of blood-red crystals that he had never noticed before. He approached them with caution and was startled when a strange voice filled his ears. The voice was coming from the crystals and addressed him by name. The voice asked if Sombra had come to release them yet, but he was only left confused. In slight irritation, the voice revealed they were his mother and that he was from a different world. Sombra, still confused, then learned he wasn't even a normal pony, which is why he appeared lackluster in color and had no cutie mark. He was an umbrum, a shadow pony. His mother then told him how everyone was afraid of their kind because long ago they had tried to take over the kingdom and had haunted their every nightmare, as she described it. To defeat them, the crystal heart was put in place to weaken them, and they were banished inside that crystal. In anger and newfound awareness, Sombra finally knew why he could never enjoy the crystal fair. The heart sensed his shadow ancestry and was trying to get rid of him. He was distraught, as none of that was his fault, but he suffered for his lineage year after year. His mother then explained how his true powers would make him more vulnerable to the heart, so they had kept it from him, but now his true potential would surface. As she said this, Sombra was struck with lightning of a pinkish hue and acquired the villainous look we are familiar with. His pupils were red to match his curved red horn, his sclera were now a sickly lime green, and he had purple fog trailing from his eyes. He then tried out his new powers, but the voice told him to take caution, as he may have trouble controlling them. His mother told him that all of the umbrum have these powers and are waiting for Sombra to set them free. But first, he must take the crystal heart. Sombra was reluctant, as he knew his friendship with Radiant Hope would be ruined, but his hesitation was vanquished when his mother warned him that if the heart was not gone by the next crystal fair, he would be destroyed for good. With the knowledge of his past and his true identity, Sombra left and stole the crystal heart from its position under the castle. However, as he was turning to leave, Princess Amore confronted him. She reminded him that he could still change his path and return the heart, but Sombra was already too far gone. Upon realizing she knew he was an umbrum and why he was in pain every crystal fair, he yelled that she made the heart to hurt him. She earnestly told him that the heart was meant for other dark forces, and that she had always knew he could find the light. She still believed in him then, but Sombra could not even believe in himself. Without prior thinking, he transformed her into stone. Sombra had decided that fear was stronger than love, and he planned to distill this fear into every pony who had hurt him all those years. In the middle of his thoughts, Radiant Hope entered the scene. She ran to the princess, trying to figure out how to heal her, but Sombra just smirked, saying this is how it should be. With shock and sadness, but still love for Sombra, she told him to leave before he was punished for this, but Sombra continued to push back. He explained how no one would hurt him, but he and her would be doing the hurting from now on. Realizing the darkness he had succumbed to, Radiant Hope ran away, calling him a monster. Sombra then titled himself the King of Monsters and let her depart. In his diary, he mentions that letting her leave was his one mistake. After witnessing Sombra's betrayal, Radiant Hope approached Princess Celestia and Princess Luna about the situation. While she was gone, Sombra had enslaved the crystal ponies, but soon the princesses arrived and banished him away. In pure rage, Sombra claimed he wanted Radiant Hope to suffer the most and had formed a new spell just for her. He wanted her to suffer by seeing her home, the home that she had chose over him, to fall. His diary entry ends with these last words: "How bitter will her victory taste when she has no home left." The backstory ends with Radiant Hope deserting her studies of becoming a princess in her hopes to get Sombra back, and Sombra plotting his revenge on the only pony who truly loved him. Radiant Hope sacrificed her future in order to save his, and eventually he will realize that just like her vision didn't come to pass, his didn't and doesn't have to follow that either. Of course, that is further explained in the Siege of the Crystal Empire comic, and I can do a more in-depth video on that later on. So, for a little extra info to fill in the gaps and even leave room for your imagination, here are two scenes from the Siege of the Crystal Empire comic. So when Cadance and Radiant Hope first meet, Radiant Hope remarks on how similar she looks to Princess Amore and questions if they are related somehow. Cadance replies saying she doesn't know and is only an orphan. This information could actually tie into Cadance's backstory, because if Amore really was her mother, once Sombra turned her to stone, this would make sense as to why Cadance became an orphan. It all lines up. It makes sense why she would have the qualities of a princess and have a cutie mark resembling the one weapon her mother created to protect the crystal subjects. The next scene is when they are in the dungeon of the Umbrum. Radiant Hope was the only pony able to hear them initially, just like she was able to see certain things others couldn't. The Umbrum had persuaded her for centuries to help their kind and revive Sombra, and their home even kept her from aging. She had brought Cadance there to check it out, and this is when Sombra's mother explains how he made it through the door. She told them that when he was a filly, they put a spell on him to make him appear like a pony so he could pass through the border. This way he could blend in with the other ponies, and they wouldn't know who he truly was. Not even he would be aware of the truth until he was finally old enough and could learn of his past. Also, when Cadance uses her magic to light the way, Rabia complains about her using Amore's love magic. This further proves her relation with the former princess. So that's King Sombra's backstory, a tale of an innocent umbrum pony that rose from the shadows and made a friend with the beautiful and quirky crystal pony, Radiant Hope. Through trials and isolation, the two stuck by each other through every hardship, and even when the fear of his future overtook him, she never left his side. Once the darkness fully encompassed him, Sombra embraced his original mission to free his family and continued to enact revenge on the ones who wronged him as long as he could. And all throughout his fall to wickedness, Radiant Hope never accepted that this was his true destiny. Even though the Crystal Heart showed her as a princess, she didn't become a traditional one, but found her love beside King Sombra and became kind of royalty in that way. And Sombra may have seen the darkness in his vision, but that didn't mean he was destined for eternal evil. It was just showing the true powers that had been inside of him all along and had yet to surface. Ultimately, the backstory was an intriguing one to research, and definitely gives a more soft outlook on King Sombra's fall to darkness. Well, that's it for this video. Please like and subscribe, and have a great rest of your day. Ninja, go!